SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music on this
Friday Eve.
All right, I made it. Made it in to the big TPUSA event at the Pavilion, the Sandy and John Black Pavilion at Ole Miss. That's where the Rebels play basketball, of course. What an event it was. Erica Kirk, the widow of the brutally assassinated Charlie Kirk. We gotta keep bringing that up because it was a brutal assassination in broad daylight. By the way, Rhino, what the heck happened to that guy? What's the status of the killer?
He's awaiting trial. His trans roommate, lover, boyfriend thing has been missing for the last 6 weeks, and there's a whole bunch of crazy conspiracies online that seem to be pretty easily debunked if you just use a little reason. But
oh, geez,
reason and common sense are in short supply nowadays.
No doubt. But what an event it was. Of course, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. What a fantastic job he did. I'd have to tell you, just to kick it off at the highest level, you know, of all the times, of course, we've seen J.D. Vance in public. I had the first time, I guess, to see him in person at the RNC convention in July 24. You know, I was kind of moderately impressed. He's a brilliant guy. His story is fascinating, all the above. But I didn't really feel like that he was comfortable. How about that? In a public setting, large public setting. Not the case last night. He was fantastic. I was super impressed, and I think everybody at the event was. And, of course, the event was broadcast through a number of media sources, including SuperTalk Mississippi, which also streamed the event. But we got there. Of course, I left right after the show. Doors opened at 3. The event was scheduled to kick off at 5:30, but, you know, those aren't hard, fast times, if you will. And we got there, and the first thing you see are these outrageously long lines of people in the rain. Never seen anything like that to get into that building, the Pavilion. You certainly don't see that for basketball games, right? I mean, even if you pack the place, you don't see that. And that's because if you don't got a ticket, you're not going to go stand in line.
Right.
This was different in that we're going to let everybody in that's got a ticket, students first, which is the way it should be. They're receiving the priority. Once that is done, if there's any room, then students without a ticket would be considered. And then, of course, non-students. Well, the place was 99% students, as it should be. And every seat was taken. I think the latest report I saw was that 1,000 were turned away, 9,500 on hand. But we got there about 3:30. I've never seen a line like that of people, mainly students, in their rain gear, some at least in their umbrellas, and they also had informed you can't bring your umbrella in. So that was a bit of an issue. It was just not the best weather, but it didn't matter because lots of people braved it and were willing to put up with that, stand in line for a long time to attend this event. The Daily Mississippian, the Ole Miss newspaper, has a story, as you would expect. And I'm pretty impressed with the story, honestly. I thought it was fair coverage. And Rhino, in every seat, there was a poster, a sign, paper sign, if you will, with the late, great Charlie Kirk and the Turning Point USA logo. Look, the signs, I think, the 8.5 by 17 size, you know what I'm talking about? Like the, not 8.5 by 14, I believe that's legal paper size. This was, I think, 17. I'm guessing was what it looked like. You can see the pictures of people holding it. But every seat had one, and there was a point at which the crowd was asked to hold those up out of respect for Charlie Kirk. And that was really a pretty cool moment, honestly. Everybody holding those up. And both, I would say, Erica Kirk and, of course, Vice President J.D. Vance exhorted the students, those in attendance, to honor America by pursuing Christian civic values. And this is probably the most remarkable part of the event, in my view, was the high focus on Christianity and Christian values. You know, that just seems like that's become taboo in this country, even though the left is quick to tell you there's no war on Christianity. And they always like to invoke this separation of church and state. And anybody that can read our founding knows that's not what it said. It didn't say, hey, expunge all reference to any religion. That's not what the founders said. It's not what our founding documents say.
In fact, the notion of separation of church and state comes from a letter Thomas Jefferson wrote.
Okay.
It's nowhere in the founding documents. It was in his letter to the Danbury Baptists to give his personal opinion on how the government should be set up and should be free from the overarching influence of religion like they had just escaped in England.
Right. And it's pretty clear that our country was not designed such that its government only recognized one religion, one faith, and forced you, as is the case in some countries, right? And certainly was when our founders said, we're getting the heck out of there here, and made the trip across the ocean there. That was one of the driving reasons for that. And he talked about that. But we've gotten to a point where, oh my gosh, you've got a cross on your desk, get rid of that thing immediately if you work in government or something like that. Well, that's nonsense. A nativity scene in a city hall, be gone with that. It's ridiculous. That's not endorsement. More importantly, that's not force. When it becomes force, that's a problem. Nobody's forcing you. In fact, I think it's fair to say we on the right believe you have the right to worship as you see fit. We may disagree with it, but we respect the right and we protect that right. He did a good job of promoting, and so did she, of course, and this was a big part of Charlie's message and narrative as well. But I was most impressed that you got 9,500 students that didn't object to that, supported it, embraced it, with the exception of one person. Now, what the vice president did that was so cool was he kind of took a page out of Charlie Kirk's playbook in that he fielded questions. You got to admit, Rhino, that's pretty unusual for someone at that level, vice president, president, to field questions from the public, you know, in a setting like that. Of course, that's what Charlie's known for, going into the belly of these beasts where the faculty administration worked overtime block him from even being on campus. By the way, that's what I consider force. And to a great extent, it's because of the values he espoused, which were rooted in his Christian faith. They didn't want that talked about on a college campus. Sometimes it feels like the old days of the USSR. We don't want the people within our country to know the good things that are happening under free market capitalism and freedom in America. Let's just hide all that from them, China too, and try to persuade these unsuspecting people this is really a better system. Look how great it is, right? You feel like that's happening to some extent on our college campuses, and then when Charlie Kirk comes in, he blows the lid off that nonsense, and they don't want that. They don't want young students hearing another viewpoint. You've got to accept our viewpoint as the gospel and live your life accordingly. But, man, that's pretty cool when you think about the vice president talking directly to students. There was one individual, we got some sound we got to play for you, I sent to you, that wasn't too keen on the vice president's viewpoints. We're coming right back in the Element Well studio.
That's what the world is today.
Hey, this is Bob.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Bring it on! Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is on.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
With an alien nation, smiles of painted porcelain face, and we're supposed to trust this. Decorum has its place, but you and I beyond that. With a question I would ask.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. We've got Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, on the program at 12:05 today. So, before we went to break, I was just talking about how the vice president very patiently, very proficiently, very deftly fielded questions, good questions, from all students except one individual. And folks were just asked to line up on the floor, come out of the audience, line up on the floor, about midway up through the floor, facing, of course, the stage, where the vice president was at the podium there. And a mic was set up. The TPUSA people, of course, running that. And ask questions, which, again, mirrored what Charlie Kirk used to do when he would tour campuses. By the way, Erica Kirk, Rhino, made an excellent analysis, I thought, about how Charlie evolved in this process. And it's such a good lesson for anyone who is conducting a town hall type Q&A format with people, because what people want to know and want to feel like when they're asking questions is that you're focused on them and their question, and you're listening. And what she said is that when he initially started doing that on his tours, he would hold the mic up to his mouth while the person was asking the question. And she said, he came to the conclusion that I'm just hearing and that I listen when I put the mic down and the question's being asked. And that honestly is a key tenet of effective listening, something we all should practice and get better at and improve on. So he did excellent at this. Okay, so I said use some sound here. This is, to the best of my knowledge, just listening to all the questions, which went on for about 40 minutes, and turning around. I was on the floor, turning around and watching these individuals come to the mic. This person appeared to me to be the only, just based on observation of her physical appearance or age, she wasn't a college student, But and you can sense from her accent, and she makes reference to it, she is an immigrant. You got it? And we can, if we can make it work, we can fire it up. She asks questions, and the vice president did excellent, I think, in answering it. In particular, a question concerning illegal immigration and kind of got a little explicit, specific about, well, how many immigrants should we allow in the country? And the vice president responded to that question, I thought, in an excellent fashion. Really good stuff. But you could tell that she was attempting to be respectfully hostile. How about that? She wasn't attacking him, but I would say that she was sort of denouncing him and the administration's policies, in particular with respect to immigration. You got it working? Or?
You gave me two videos.
Oh.
One of them is just him talking. The other one is him answering a question from a guy.
Okay. Well,
so
I may say, let's get him talking. Let me set it up. She said, this is her saying, and when you talk about too many immigrants here, when did you guys decide that number? Well, that's a dumb question. Why did you sell us a dream? You made us spend our youth, our wealth in this country, and gave us a dream. You don't owe us anything. We have worked hard for it. Then how can you, as vice president, stand there and say that we have too many of them now, and we're going to take them out to people who are here rightfully, so by paying them money that you guys asked us? I don't know what she meant, but here's what the vice president said.
But my view is, look, there are people who want to come to the United States of America, and some of them, I'm sure, can enrich the United States of America by coming here, but we have got to get our overall numbers way, way down. Too many people have come into the United States of America. When something like that happens, you've got to allow your own society to cohere a little bit, to build a sense of common identity for all the newcomers to assimilate, the ones who are going to stay, to assimilate into American culture. When you do that, you've got to be careful about any additional immigration, in my view.
When you talk about too many immigrants here, when did you guys decide that number?
What is the exact number of immigrants America should accept in the future? Right now, the answer is far less than we've been accepting. We have got to become a common community again, and you can't do that when you have such high numbers of immigration, which is one of the reasons why we have the immigration policy we do.
Yeah. So I think the main point there is, shouldn't we be taking a bit of a lesson from the European nations that just opened up their borders in the interest of diversity and inclusion and equity? And now look what's happened. You don't even recognize England anymore. Jolly old England with the smug Brits. That's what they're known for. And I say that somewhat affectionately. France, you don't recognize it anymore. Germany, they finally got the message, right? So, and said, okay, enough. But the point the vice president makes there is, if you want to come here and then just complain and bring your culture and fail to assimilate into America as an American, you're now an American first and foremost. And we're seeing people in this country that have the right, because that's the way our laws work, and that is consistent with the First Amendment and freedom, to complain and grouse and denounce and condemn all day long. You have the right, but we have the right to shut the border down, to quit allowing people that think like that to come in here. Now, sadly, unfortunately, there are a lot of bona fide American citizens that feel that way, particularly on the left. They hate this country. Oh, my gosh. So I think the vice president's right. You need to be an American. I remember my dad, whose grandparents would be my great-grandparents, came here from Europe, Portugal and Italy specifically. And I always wondered when I was growing up, because my grandfather passed away before I was, on my dad's side, before I was born, but my grandmother spoke fairly fluid Italian and English. And I would ask my dad, hey, Dad, how come you don't speak Italian? He said, because when I was raised, I was told, you're in America. You speak English. And he told me that even as a youngster, because when you're a young person, you know what you do. You say the things you hear adults say. And he picked a language up when they would speak to each other in Italian, and he'd speak it. He said they'd come over and slap him. You're in America. You speak English. Dang it. That's the way it ought to be. That made sense to me. So even though my dad was raised in a household and around his aunts and uncles that all spoke fluent Italian and English, he and the other children of those families only learned English because you're in America, and that's the language. That's what I believe the vice president was saying yesterday. Totally am on board with that. The other aspect, I think, was that he was defending this country's relationship with Israel, and he indicated that Israel is the key to stability in the Middle East region, which to a great extent is the key to global stability, because there's some wackos in some of those countries that want nothing more than to attain nuclear weaponry and use it against humanity. But he made it very clear, I can't remember the exact question a student asked, who, by the way, is a supporter, but was concerned about getting a little too cozy with Israel. And he made it very clear that the administration, the president, he do not take orders from Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's been kind of a complaint that's been going on, if you will. And he made that very clear. No, we don't do that. So I thought that was awesome. And then the other thing this woman confronted him about was the fact that his wife is not Christian, but he is. And she asked, well, how can you come out here and espouse Christian values and promote that and express your commitment to that, but yet your wife's not? And how are you raising your children? I mean, she got pretty personal, which is fine. He's the vice president. And also, Rhino interrupted him frequently when he was trying to answer. That's pretty much par for the course for the left. And basically says, you know what? We just work it out. We share similar worldviews and values. We just happen to practice different faiths and religion, but there's much more intersection. And we work it out. And we don't fight and argue about it. Coming right back. Stay with us.
You know what that means.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
We'll do it live
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. Okay, so on the C Spire text line, good morning. I was upset how JD talked at a God meeting, talking so nasty. So
I'm laughing because I was ribbing you for.
Rhino says it's my fault.
You were saying you're getting on to people for using bad language, and they're like, well, now you got listeners getting on to people for bad language.
Okay, but come on. It's an hour when the guy used the S word one time in an hour, and it was kind of tongue-in-cheek funny. You remember the context. I think it was like, well, they criticize us for all kinds of other as well, something to that effect. And my criticism is all these loony lefty people with, as you like to say, the big glasses and the orifices all pierced with different things and the big purple hair that drop F-bombs every other word. There's like 20 in 30 seconds. That's a little different. Now, you made the point. Sometimes you got to use that word for emphasis. Okay, I'll buy that. And I've been known to do that as well. I don't want people to think that I'm this holier than thou prude. I'm not. But good grief, when I pull up a minute video of somebody trying to make a point, and most of the words are F-bombs, 2/3 of them are, a third is maybe non-F-bombs, that's when I guess I get a little upset. In this case, it was one S word in an hour. Oh, my gosh. Okay, so
I would just also say that it was not necessarily a God meeting.
That's right. It was not.
It's not like they were holding a tent.
This was not a revival. This was not a Sunday come to go to meeting worship service. This was not. I just happened to point out that I thought injecting the Christian principles theme and talking a lot about that, because this was a Turning Point USA event, and that was something that was extremely important to Charlie Kirk, the founder, and they were just continuing that tradition. That's all. And honoring his legacy in doing so. What did Charlie's, his message to young people was the best thing you could do in life is fall in love, get married, have children, and raise a family under these Christian principles, right? I think that was his key message to people that are approaching that age. Amen. Absolutely. 100%. All right. Here's the vice president. And then here he is talking about actually answering the question. Unfortunately, we can't find the question audio from the lady who asked about all the immigrant stuff that I read to you. Here we go.
If you ask the question, what is the exact right number of immigrants for the United States to let in, it is just very specific on the context. If you go back to the 1920s, the United States passed an Immigration Reform Act that effectively cut down immigration to close to zero for 40 years in this country. And what happened over those 40 years? The many people who had come from many different foreign countries and different foreign cultures, they assimilated into American culture. And there was an expectation that they would assimilate into American culture. I think we have two problems in our immigration system today. And my guess is you're probably a slightly more leftist political persuasion, liberal political persuasion, maybe not. But here's the thing. I remember back in my establishment GOP days, when I was still very early getting involved in Republican politics, I remember a conservative think tank person who told me that one of the reasons why immigration was really good is that if you had enough diversity in a country, people would mistrust each other and they wouldn't join labor unions.
True story.
Okay? So when I see a lot of left-wing people who theoretically support organized labor saying we need to flood the country with a limitless number of immigrants, they're unwilling to set any limitations on it. My response to that is you are destroying the very social trust on which American freedom and prosperity was built. And that is really important to me. So the honest answer to your question, what is the exact number of immigrants America should accept in the future? Right now, the answer is far less than we've been accepting. We have got to become a common community again, and you can't do that when you have such high numbers of immigration, which is one of the reasons why we have the immigration policy we do. Thank you. Next.
Totally agree. 100% agree. I thought it was a great response there. A whole lot more than we allow in today. And let's be honest, had that policy been followed the last 4 years, we wouldn't have the tens of millions that crossed over under the Biden administration when they just opened the doors wide open and told our immigration officials, just look the other way and let everybody in. In fact, we're giving them plane flights to cities, right? Bus rides, putting them up in hotels and giving them all sorts of other benefits. And then when they commit crimes, look the other way then too. Let them drive vehicles and kill people. You should go down the list. Obviously, that's too much. And there was a question asked of the vice president. Well, as part of answering a question, he said, we're not actually sure how many people are here. Some people, immigrants, illegals. Some people say it's 20 million. I'm not talking about legal, I'm talking about illegal, by the way. Some people say it's 20, some 30. We've seen reports that suggest it's 50. That's a lot in a country of 330 million. That's too many. I agree. Now, the president, of course, committed to mass deportation, and maybe there's a plan to do that. I don't really think that started. All the reports I've seen say since he's been in office, about 500,000 have either left on their own accord or have been deported. But good grief, that seems like a week's worth of those who crossed the border. When we were watching it here on the screen in the studio, we're seeing images of caravans as far as the eye could see of illegals approaching our border to cross over. So I thought that was a great answer to the question. I know Thomas is all fired up because, in a positive way, because of how he actually talked about the law that was passed in, I believe it was 1924, as I recall. And that's the Immigration Act of 1924, known as the Johnson-Reed Act. And it essentially limited the number of immigrants allowed into the country through a national origins quota. We'll let so many of people from this country in, this country. That's not actually a bad idea. And I want to say, Rhino, check me out on this, that like no Asians for a while. I think it completely banned and prohibited.
I think it was just certain Asian countries.
Okay, specific countries. All right, in Asia. And I know Thomas stays all upset about the H-1B visa program. Here's where I land on that. And by the way, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has been very vocal the last few days in opposition to the abuse. And that's what's going on. The H-1B visa program is not a bad deal when properly employed. Problem is, it's been stretched, like so many other laws in our country, way beyond its intent and its goal and its purpose, which really is, hey, look, American employers, you hire Americans first. If there are certain skills where there is a shortage, critical shortage of workers, American workers, and you need to go abroad to import workers, they can get a visa to do so. But the problem is it's now being used as a way to, hey, wait, we can fire all these American workers and bring in these foreign workers for a whole lot less money. That's not right. And so I do agree with Thomas in that respect. That's absolutely not right. But that's abusing a law. That's not leveraging the law for proper, valuable benefit to our society. Now, typically the fields where you see the bringing in of these immigrants, it's medicine, it's technology.
That's what it seems like, but in the last several months, it's come to light that it's just about every industry under the sun.
100%. And you know what? The vice president last night talked about accountants. He literally referenced accountants as an occupation, that we're seeing companies terminate their American accounting staff and bringing in foreign accountants for much less pay. That's wrong. That's completely wrong. And so I'm not a fan of protectionism, but I'm also a believer in sovereignty and borders, and this is consistent with that. So if we're going to allow people in the country, even legally, well, let's be sensible and thoughtful about that. Let's not harm Americans. And, of course, I got to point this out before we go to break. Oh, the folks over there at MSNBC, you know, that's the former network or the network of the former race lady over there. You know what their headline was on this subject with respect to the vice president's analysis last night? J.D. Vance makes it clear at a conservative event he's against legal immigration, too. Oh, you left-wing lunatics over at MSNBC. Never disappoint, do they? Jeez. All right, we're stepping aside for a break. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Check it out. Let's do this.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's get on with it.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Roxanne, you don't have to put on the red light. Those days are over.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Thanks for being with us today on the C Spire text line. American construction workers experienced this for the last 20 years. Not many Americans in the labor end. Well, that is true, but I would submit that that's because our society has been busy conditioning young people. You gotta get through your elementary and primary education, your secondary education. You got to go to college, get a degree, and go get a professional job, right? I mean, that's what most parents aspire for their children, and that's fine. And they're taking those jobs. They're working those jobs. That's been going on for decades. And so what that meant is that kind of left a vacuum in the jobs that don't necessarily require a college education and involve more working with your hands, physical labor, construction, as an example. And so that vacuum was filled by people coming across the border that were willing to work those jobs, that are pretty good at it, and will work for the wages that make the industry viable. Because when you get the wages up to a point where nobody's going to buy your stuff, I can't afford your construction. You may have American workers, but I can't afford it, so nobody gets anything in that case.
You can get into a pretty serious chicken and egg back and forth about construction, because construction prices go up because contractors are building bigger houses, because bigger houses mean more profit, but bigger houses also sell to and you just go back and forth with the problem. But yeah, when you boil it all down, it really does come down to, for a couple generations, skilled labor and manual labor were almost frowned upon by society, and that meant that those that do have the skills, especially for skilled labor, like electricians, like HVAC, like plumbing, those jobs went from everyday average pay for labor to you can make six figures because there's three of you within 30 miles.
Absolutely. And the demand is just outstripping the supply of the labor for those services and those jobs. And so that has been very opportunistic. And so I think the good news is our society has kind of had a bit of an epiphany and realized, that's not for everybody. You see more and more people. I'm one of them.
It was Mike Rowe that really
brought it to
the ball rolling on
agree.
That, and really started talking about it long before anybody else was.
No, I totally agree. We interviewed Representative Jill Ford from the Mississippi State House talking about her kids, her sons that are in the plumbing business, and they're doing fantastic. They do great work, done work at my house. I've recommended them to several other people as well. And, at first that was kind of hard, I think she said, when we interviewed her, for her and her husband, Mike, to accept. But then they realized, this is pretty dang good employment. And they're running a business, let's be honest. They're not just, they're plumbers, but running a business. And all the dimensions and all the facets of running a business, from customer service to project management and scheduling and accounting and operations, that's all part of running a business, and that requires a diverse skill set and people that work in the business. So that's just awesome, and that's the way it should be. I certainly applaud that. I think it's great. But, yeah, I think we crossed the line, to your point, when originally it was, we don't have enough people for the medical field, for these various technology fields, and we can import people through this H-1B visa program to fill that need, fill that void. Well, yeah, that made sense. But to your point, it's being abused. I know you're shocked that a government program's being abused here, but it's being abused. And it's being abused to the detriment of American citizens. And, it was also supposed to be temporary. Wasn't supposed to be permanent employment. The original premise of the H-1B program was supposed to be temporarily, while we're training more Americans to do these jobs, we'll let you temporarily hire foreign workers, bring them into this country legally to work these jobs. And it's kind of a stepping stone to a green card. So, look, and even the vice president said, folks with supreme intellect, maybe, that there's just a global shortage of. If we can bring more of those into the country to work highly specialized. I don't mean run-of-the-mill, no disrespect to my accounting cohorts. I don't mean run-of-the-mill jobs like that we have plenty of Americans that can do. I mean super highly specialized skills. Perhaps, Rhino, we could refer to Werner von Braun as maybe one of the original members of that group that brought his skills, his talents, his intellect to this country that we leveraged. Because before that, he was working for bad people who wanted to use what he was able to create for nefarious purposes. Fox News SuperTalk News is next. Stay with us.
Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply, and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays from the Element Wealth Studio on this
Friday Eve.
Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. The C Spire text line, it's open, 601-879-4395. And today on In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar, you'll hear an interview with Carrie Hudson of the legendary Mississippi band Blue Mountain. In football Friday nights in Oxford concert series, Ratchet Entertainment Group turning up the energy this fall with football Friday nights in Oxford. On Friday, Halloween night. Man, that's tomorrow. And the eve of Ole Miss versus South Carolina, the Molly Ringwalds turn to the lyric. They'll take you on a wild ride through the biggest hits of the 80s with one of the most fun nights you'll ever experience. Ratchet Entertainment. So, you got to play this. This was entertaining. This is Bernie Sanders. This is like a chronology of him issuing a stark warning. This goes back to 1993 to present day.
Yeah, we're a little late in wishing him well in the publishing and release of his new book, Fight Oligarchy. And it seems like that's a fight he's been fighting for a while.
This great country of ours is moving very rapidly in the direction of oligarchy. The United States of America today is increasingly becoming an oligarchy. More and more moving toward an oligarchy. We are moving in the direction of oligarchy. We will move even more rapidly in the direction of an oligarchy. This great country is evolving into an oligarchic society.
2014.
It is called oligarchy, and that is the system we are rapidly moving toward. This is a budget that moves our country rapidly into the direction of oligarchy. A handful of billionaires are moving this entire planet toward an oligarchic society.
Start with the bad news, which is pretty bad, and that is that under Donald Trump, this country is hurtling rapidly toward oligarchy.
Oligarchy. That's so good. Oh, my God. So has that happened yet? Just curious. Are we at oligarchy stage yet?
It only really seems to happen recently when Republicans are in some form of control.
I see. It's the old oligarchy. They're obsessed with that, man. They really are. And I don't know where all that's going, but I don't think that's working out too well for the senator from Vermont. He's so hyper-focused on that. But I will admit, he's got a bunch of people in New York City, thinking that this is what they want. They want a socialist mayor to come in and fight oligarchy. And that looks like where we're headed. The far left hailing New York City socialist Zoran Mandami as the Democrat Party's future. Is that going to work? You just kind of wonder, are there Democrats out there who are attempting to distance themselves from Mandami because they sure aren't doing it in a very public fashion? They may be doing it behind closed doors, but I would say publicly you're seeing more of those Democrats come out in support, such as the minority leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries. He's come out with a full-throated endorsement. Kathy Hochul, the governor, she's in trouble in the next cycle. And there are others as well. They've come out and said, yeah. So I don't know where that's going to go, but it doesn't look good for New York as far as electing someone other than Zoran Mandami. Cuomo trailing the Democrat nominee by about 10 points, right? Last I looked. Now, he has made up some ground because he was trailing by much more than that a short couple of weeks ago. He's made up some ground, but he's still trailing by 10 points.
Yeah, Mamdani kind of got caught telling another lie when he came out and said something about his aunt being discriminated against on the subway after 9/11. And then some journalist was like, well, let's go talk to the aunt. And they found that the aunt didn't even live in the U.S. in 2001. So then he backtracked and tried to say, well, no, it was my father's cousin that I call aunt, and she's dead.
Oh, my gosh. What a nut. Well, it's certainly worrisome to see that and very disappointing to see that he could rise to the level of being on the cusp of taking over New York City as its mayor. One of the most important cities in the world, the largest city in this country, and you wonder if we're going to witness an exodus of citizens from the city of New York. Certainly those who would be in his crosshairs from a taxation perspective. Do they not realize that those people are pretty critical to the well-being of New York City? They're the ones who pay the bills.
That would require second-order thinking.
I see. Because we see that at the federal level as well, quite a bit. This whole talking point of, well, we can have this, but we can't have that. We can't have this and that, and it's all because we've given all these tax breaks to the billionaires. That's just horse hockey. It's not an either-or deal. I would appreciate that argument if historically our federal government had been running balanced budgets. If they truly did get in the room and say, I'm sorry, we can't approve that spending because we don't have enough revenue over here on the revenue side to pay for it. Like you run your household. But does that ever come up? No. Oh, it's just a matter of politically, do I support or oppose whatever that program or provision of a program is? That seems to be where we're focused more. Not, hey, wait a second, guys, look over here on the revenue side. We're a little short-handed here. From a money perspective, sorry, we can't do that. Just like you have to run your household. That never enters the equation, I'm sorry to say. But the Democrats very effectively promote that narrative. Oh, yeah, you can't have this and that and the other because the billionaires got tax breaks. As if it is their obligation to pay for everybody's retirement and health care. This small number of people, a whopping 800 people out of 340 million. Of course, then people like Bernie Sanders and Zoran Mandami and AOC, there's too much wealth concentration. And they know, and again, something I point out regularly requires the second order thinking, as you like to say. Well, quit using their stuff because you're the ones that's using their stuff to promote your message. You're making them rich while you're complaining about them being rich. I'm not wrong about that. You know exactly what I mean. You very effectively utilize all that they've created for personal gain while blasting them for making money off what they created.
Which means one of two things. Either they're too stupid to understand the words that are coming out of their own mouths, or they believe that their voters are that stupid to believe the stupid words coming out of their mouths.
My money's on a combination of the two. Oh, my gosh. Unbelievable.
I was laughing at CC and Senatovia's text on the C Spire text line. The oligarch, you monster, jumps from place to place. He's hard to keep up with.
Oh, man. Thomas, by the way, don't waste your time telling me what happened in the AWS outage a week ago. I've researched it and analyzed it in fantastically transparent detail. Don't waste your time. I don't need an education on what happened in this outage. I built and operated data centers. I'm pretty familiar with that process, more so than anybody else you will talk to. I can assure you. Good grief. Tim and McGee, how much is Bernie worth? Well, he's not a billionaire. He's worth a few million, and that's why he never uses millionaire. He used to invoke millionaire, right? It's billionaire now. That's because once he eclipsed the billionaire status level, the millionaire with an M status level, he decided to elevate those in his crosshairs. You got to be a billionaire. All 800 of them. 2,000 in the world, I think. 800 in this country. Last I checked, 200 in California. And that's all they're obsessed and consumed with that. Let me go get their money, their assets, their money, their assets. That'll fix everything. We're coming right back. Don't forget Chris Towner with the Committee for a Responsible Budget at 12:05 today.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Welcome to our shop.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Okay, now you have a good one.
Get your motor running. Head out on the highway. Looking for adventure. And whatever comes our way. Yeah, darling, go make it happen. Take the world in a loving embrace. Buy all of the guns and pumps and explode into space. I like smoking lightning. Heavy metal thunder.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. One of the statements the Vice President made last night in kind of his closing remarks was just about being courageous. And Erica Kirk did the same thing. And that was a big part of Charlie Kirk's message as well. Because certainly going into some of these university campuses that are dominated by people who disagree with his viewpoints and his lifestyle and virtually everything he said, and honestly held deep personal disdain for him. And he'd go right into the heart of those environments. And that was certainly a reflection of his courage. But the vice president said you can't save a country that we're too afraid to defend, that we're on a mission to save our country, and I would argue we're saving it from the radical leftists that want to convert it into a socialist wasteland. And I thought that was a really good message. I did. So, and I appreciate that. Good stuff. Let's see. Gary from Tishomingo, I wonder how our state Democrats feel about Mondami. I haven't seen any endorsements. Have you, Rhino? I think they've been kind of mum on it. Little concerned because it may be safe to say that the Democrats of Mississippi are not quite as far to the left as the Socialist Democrat, at least publicly.
Yeah, I was about to say not publicly.
As the Socialist Democrats are in New York City, which are a bunch of affluent elitists that honestly seem to be engaged in virtue signaling and
that's the whole point for a large swath of the voters for Mamdani is that it's a status thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I voted for a first.
I think that's right. So
let me look down my nose at you little people.
Yeah, they do, man. Well, yeah, by the way, there's a question. Did Jeffries ever endorse Zoran? Yeah, he did. That was last week, I think. Maybe the week prior to that. But he, for months, wouldn't say. He kind of declined and stopped short of just explicit endorsement. He did say that he has, quote, principled disagreement with some of Mamdani's views, but he did ultimately endorse them. Is it kind of weird that the leaders for the Democrat Party in the House and the Senate both come from New York? So it's a New York senator, and I think Jeffries is from Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken, that area. And he said that he agreed with it because he focused on the affordability crisis. Of course, their idea of affordability crisis is, again, shake down the billionaires and just shove it out the door in the form of government programs. By the way, that still doesn't balance the budget, and New York has a budgetary crisis upon itself as well, talking about New York City.
Possibly be the 50 million people living in America and taking up infrastructure and resources that shouldn't be here.
Right. So 42 million on food stamps, and I think a fair analysis of the breakdown, the composition of those recipients is, the vast majority of them, they're disabled, legitimately disabled. I don't mean those that are faking their disability, because that may be the number one scam of our government programs that are for the disabled, are people who fake disability. We mentioned that before. I get a headache about once every 2 or 3 months. It lasts 30 minutes. Okay, here's your disability slip. Go get all the government bennies you want. Yeah, that's wrong. Totally wrong. And that is a shakedown and an abuse of taxpayer funding that needs to be addressed. Children that by no fault of their own living in households that are just bad from a economic perspective, households that probably, and this may sound harsh and hostile, probably shouldn't have had children. Right? If you can't afford them, if you say, well, I can have this child as long as I get all these government benefits, well, then you shouldn't have the child. That's just my view. And unfortunately in this country, the people that can't afford it, the childbearing age people, are choosing not to. For that reason, they say, we really don't feel comfortable taking on the added expense of a child. That's sad. That's a shame. We got to fix that. But we seem to experience reproduction and propagation in the households that can't afford it and rely on the government to take care of their children. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the number one category of recipient, is children in these low-income homes. Same with Medicaid. Medicaid's, of the 75 million enrolled in Medicaid, like 40 million are kids. In Mississippi, the 750,000 roughly in Medicaid, 400,000 are kids living in homes with very low income that qualify for the benefits. But on the other hand, you and I were talking, we're seeing videos being produced by people that probably aren't the best spokespeople you would pick in support of the SNAP program, because they look like they had never missed a meal. Again, somebody's probably getting mad at me for saying that. It's just the truth. You don't look like you're hurting for food, and you're more about just being mad and angry and lashing out at those in government who really want you off the government dole. And of course, you're just mad, and you make your living kind of you thrive on permanent grievances. You're permanently what I call part of the permanently aggrieved class. I just wouldn't pick them. Now, if you wanted to go into a truly needy environment where there perhaps are someone who's sick, legitimately sick, in their home, and they're a caretaker that has to provide full-time service and assistance and care for a sick person in the home, and as a result, their income's low and they qualify, that maybe would be a more appropriate example of a program that helps the truly legitimately needy. But these folks out there dropping F-bombs in their videos because they're mad they ain't going to get their food stamps, and they weigh about 3.5 bills, and they're in a car, and they got the purple hair and the big glasses, as you like to say. I don't think I'd pick them, again, to be the ambassador for the value of the food stamps program. That's not what it was intended to be.
Well, here's the opinion of one random American sitting in his car on, food stamps.
I'm just going to say it, and I don't care who get mad. Shouldn't no grown-ass, able-bodied people be freaking out about no food stamps? If you got 2 legs, 2 arms, you can get up and talk on the phone, you can get up and take your behind to work. I'm talking to able-bodied.
Amen. Totally amen. Now, keep this in mind. You're qualified if your income is less than 130% of the federal poverty level. So if you're working and you make less than $20,000 a year as an individual, you qualify. So you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and try to get more gainful employment. But I would say this, Rhino, if that's all you're making as an individual, you probably ought to get creative and find somebody else. It doesn't have to be a spouse or even a partner. Is that being unreasonable? Maybe you need to figure out a way to share expenses by combining your households, in which case you may not qualify, but you can afford rent and power and food. It's a little second-order thinking maybe required there. I mean, in my era, and I'm not trying to point to that necessarily, but we didn't really object to that. We thought about that. You know, like, even out of college, man, I can't afford an apartment by myself. I got to get me a roommate to make ends meet. It's not unusual.
I had roommates until 6 years ago.
Okay. Well, so you get it.
And I just turned 40.
And it's
so well into my 30s.
Sharing expenses. Because remember, these programs, eligibility is based on household income. So tax returns that both are connected to that same address, that's what's used. Now, we get back into the, it ain't my problem, people. I'm not saying that works perfectly, and this is where we need technology and innovation to help with this eligibility process, because we're relying on too many humans, honestly, often bureaucrats, that it ain't my problem. Okay, here you go, you're approved. Coming right back. Stay with us.
Properly set all controls before recording.
All systems go. The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Little Doobie Brothers there bumping us into this segment. Appreciate that, Rhino. All right, so on the C Spire text line, what else we got? Stephen Pontotoc said if those women would quit those $200 nail jobs and $300 braids and weaves, they could probably afford to eat. I think that Rhino makes a good point that there is a huge black market, if you will, for converting food stamps, SNAP benefits, into cash, which is kind of crazy. But it does happen, does occur. And there's probably as many people who, again, are scamming the system, complaining about losing the benefits because they rely on that cash for their braids and their nail jobs. And that's why they're going crazy.
There's also a good point to give a little PSA to those that get a large percentage of their information from social media.
Yeah.
While this conversation has been ratcheting up about food stamps and SNAP and EBT and all that, there are probably 2-3 dozen different comedians and influencers and people that make funny content that have latched onto this and are making videos acting as if they are being impacted and coming up with some really wild and outlandish claims meant to be satirical, meant to be laughed at and not taken seriously. And those videos are being shared across social media as if they are actual recipients of benefits, and it's just not the truth. It's a bit silly to have to say this, but if it sounds too good or too bad to be true, then maybe you should take a second and think about whether or not it is. Yeah. Like one of the examples that came across my feed this morning is a comedian, I believe she's out of Ohio or Indiana, somewhere in the Midwest, that claimed that she is going to have to resort to stripping again because her 17 children cannot be fed without the, I think it was $4,700 worth of food stamps that she said she was getting each month.
That's unbelievable.
The math ain't mathing on that. And when you click on her page, you see that she makes stupid skits about all kinds of things. And she doesn't expect anybody to be taking it seriously, but some people are.
Unbelievable. Well, I think we could agree that maybe, and I say maybe because I'm not 100% convinced that these programs do provide some value again. Well, they do provide value to the truly needy. The question is whether or not they ought to be part of the federal government. To me, that's the bigger issue. Is this the business of the federal government to provide SNAP, food stamps, assistance? It's really what it is. Supplemental program, right? Was it supposed to be, as you pointed out on the show the other day, because it's honestly not that much money. It's supposed to be supplemental. It's not supposed to cover your entire month's worth of food and nourishment. That's what the way it's supposed to work. But it's morphed like so many of them do, of these programs. It's morphed into something else to the point where people are just 100% relying on the government. It's supplemental nutrition assistance program. Assistance. Supplemental. I mean, it's embedded in the name of the program. But it's gotten away from that, and it's gotten so big, and it is administered, by the way, at the state level, but it's funded with federal money. There was some discussion when the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was being debated about passing on some of the cost of benefits responsibility to the states. Currently, the administration of the program only is jointly funded, state and federal. The actual benefits themselves are 100% funded by the federal government. Administration means, of course, the people, the tools, the systems, it ain't my problem staff. That is jointly funded, state and federal. But there was a provision included in the OBBBA that does require states to cover more of the administrative cost based on the error rate. It's crazy to me that we even have a significant error rate in the administration of these programs. But I think nationwide, it's over 10%, if I'm not mistaken, like 12% on average. I could be exaggerating a bit. It may not be quite that high. Mississippi, the SNAP error rate, maybe that's where I'm getting it from. Seems like it's in the 12% range. And there are like 3 levels of additional costs states have to pick up based on their error rate. And that error rate just means, well, you gave food stamps to people, and after further review, you shouldn't have. That's kind of what the error rate is. It was
2024. The SNAP error rate for the United States was 10.93.
Okay, so that's pretty close. I said 12. I thought it was double digits.
Mississippi was 10.69.
Right, I got that right. So
California is at 10.98. Illinois is at 11.56.
So
and Maryland's at 13.64, and Massachusetts is at 14.
There you go. So the way the program, it's a sort of a penalty. It actually is described as a financial penalty for what's called the payment error rates, PER. I've got a little fancy acronym for it, the payment error rate. If it exceeds 6% then at the state level, then states are on the hook to cough up more money to cover the administrative costs associated with running the program. For a PER of 6 to 8%, that's an additional 5% states have to pay. For 8 to 10%, they pay an additional 10%, and 10% or higher, they pay 15%. I'm sorry to report that the state of Mississippi falls into the latter category. What'd you say? Almost 11%, right? 10 and change.
10.69.
Okay, so that means that the state of Mississippi would be on the hook for 15% of the administrative costs in the cost-sharing arrangement between the state and the federal government. So that significantly increases the amount of money state of Mississippi taxpayers would have to pay to administer the program. So haven't heard a lot about this. I have talked privately to Speaker of the House, Jason White. He does know this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and the governor does as well. I haven't really spoken to the lieutenant governor about it. I don't know where he stands, but I think this is going to be addressed in the next session to try to get a handle and get some control over the errors committed in the administration of SNAP benefits. What do we have? About 380,000, I believe, in the state of Mississippi enrolled in the SNAP program. That's a lot. And so that's coming. I think this was a good move on the part of the federal government. It's ridiculous that we have a nearly 12% nationwide error rate in the administration of this program. We got to do it.
The highest error rates are in Alaska at almost 25%, 24.66, and District of Columbia with 17.38.
Okay. Well, that's crazy.
It's crazy that the seat of the federal government has such a high error rate in federal benefits.
My personal opinion is, you said it. Your description of it was not my problem. You know what that comes down to? You just don't have pride in your work. You don't really care because there's no consequences. No consequences. You can't get rid of me. I can make all these errors all day long. Just look the other way. I've thought for years, honestly, that in the Medicaid program, and I know that's brutally complicated and hard to administer, but certainly from the federal perspective, I've always thought they look the other way because, there's as much abuse from the providers as there are from the subscribers, those enrolled in Medicaid. And that, to some extent, is because if you've got an outsized amount of your patient load you're being reimbursed on Medicaid, you can't really make ends meet. The reimbursement's very low. And so I think there's a tendency to over-doctor maybe, and over-service, and you're filing claims for that.
There's also the problem of when you file a claim for, say, I had to use 10 tongue suppressors, and they come back with, well, we're only paying for 6.
Yeah, that's right.
But the They're already used. Well, we're only paying for 6.
Well, exactly. So I believe that to some extent, at the federal level, they look the other way because their fear is, well, these providers are going to leave the Medicaid program because you can't get enough money off of it, so we'll just pay them more, even though we really shouldn't have. And you're right, that's the other opposite situation. Coming right back.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
We're rolling. Hit it. Go. Play it.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Derek in Greenwood asked if we've heard anything about FBI raids in the Delta. I haven't. Have you?
Yeah, there's been some scuttlebutt about feds having a sting, and some of those that have been arrested are law enforcement officers, but I'm waiting to hear back from our news department on anything they've found on it.
Okay. Got it. Interesting. Yesterday, looking at your money, old Jay Powell went to the mic to talk about cutting interest rates by 0.5 point. That's what we got. And the markets are selling off today because they're not too confident we're going to get another rate cut before the end of the year, and that was kind of baked in. And then Microsoft did have a blowout quarter, but the investment community is little miffed by the fact that the company is investing a whole bunch of money in their artificial intelligence efforts. And that, even though they had, like I said, an incredible quarter, they took a $3.1 billion hit on their OpenAI investment. That rattled investors. And then, of course, they disclosed that their intention is to spend a whole bunch of money on building out their artificial intelligence hardware and software infrastructure. And then the markets are wondering, okay, that sounds like a lot. We believe in artificial intelligence and all that it can create and produce, and we believe that will certainly flow to the bottom line. But the return on investment starts to get a little sketchy when you're spending that much money to produce that much profit. It's the old ROI model. And the same thing with Meta. Man, that really got investors rattled when they talked about Mark Zuckerberg, talked about the amount of money that his company is spending on its super artificial intelligence efforts. And the shares dropped precipitously. They raised the low end of their total expenses for the year in their guidance by $2 billion, saying expenses will come in between 116 and 118. Previously, it was 114 to 118. Investors picked up on that and didn't really like that, and so they sold off the stock today. They also had a $15.93 billion one-time tax charge. Didn't really get the details on that. They did generate a good chunk of revenue, $51 billion for the quarter. Sales up $26 billion, and or 26%, year over year. That's really strong. It's a good deal. So they're spending a bunch of money on capital investments, and again, that's got the markets kind of rattled. Let's see, last I checked, stock was down over double digits quite a bit, and that's causing the NASDAQ overall. Yeah, their stock is down 11%. $77 a share is how much the stock's down today. Now, Meta's still trading at a nice clip of $674. Microsoft down today 2.8%. It was down even more than that in the pre-market. It's down $15, trading for $526. My prediction is that Microsoft will come in and close the year out at about $545 to $550. I think a year from now we'll be talking about Microsoft at $6.50 a share. It would be $100 increase year over year, about 18%. So still going strong. It's just that right now investors, after running these stocks up so much, are saying, wait a second, you guys are spending a whole bunch of money, and we're going to have to see some higher returns on the amount you're spending. Your returns are fine relative to an amount that would be somewhat lower than that, but when you get up to that level, that gets a little crazy. So Meta also reported that something we talked about on the show, that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act has encouraging them to make capital investments, which is good for the folks who sell all of that equipment, software to them, and build out data centers for them and so forth. Because of the immediate expensing provision of President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I said that I thought that would have a greater impact on the nation's economy than perhaps any other provision in the bill. So there was a one-time non-cash income tax charge as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill that was reported by Meta, but that's one time, so that's over after this quarter. So good stuff for the high-tech industry, the Magnificent Seven. They're still on fire, and they're unique in the world and driving the nation's economy, honestly. Almost all of our GDP gains are coming from these companies, this industry. In particular, the data center build-out, all the infrastructure, IT infrastructure spending, powering our economy right now. Time for Fox News SuperTalk News. Chris Towner with the Committee for a Responsible Budget is next.
Your home. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. It's hour 3, the afternoon portion of the program, live from the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday Eve.
It's our pleasure to welcome now Chris Towner, Policy Director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
So I have been a regular subscriber to your newsletters and peruse your website. Lots of great talking points, pieces, narratives, analyses. But the big problem we face in this country that doesn't seem to garner the attention I think that is warranted is that we just eclipsed the $38 trillion of debt mark. And I don't really see any slowdown to it, Chris. I've talked about this on the program many times. We've seen the Doge team come in and do a lot of cutting and make a lot of recommendations and proposals. But when you look at this continuing resolution, for example, which would fund the government, the discretionary functions of government, there's been some talk, as you know, in the Congress about we need to return to the pre-COVID levels of spending. But according to my math, this continuing resolution is about $500 billion more than the pre-COVID level, almost 30%. An increase in a short 6 years. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to see the debt just continue to go up over the next decades, especially as we have a $2 trillion deficit. We spend about $7 trillion a year, and we take in about $5 trillion in revenue, and that's a huge deficit, and we're going to keep accruing all of that. Now, some of the reason why we're spending so much is because of inflation. A lot of programs in the federal budget are adjusted for inflation, so we've seen prices raise about 25% over the last few years. So that's part of the reason why spending is going up, but also Congress and lawmakers are just not really doing anything about the big drivers of our debt, which are mostly mandatory spending programs. That's things like Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah, they don't seem to have any appetite to touch those programs. As you know, it's called the third rail of politics. It's a political liability to even bring the programs up unless you say we're absolutely 100% going to keep them just where they are. And, of course, okay, well, then that means we're going to keep producing $2 trillion deficits. I don't see any end in sight to it. And there have been lots of ideas that have been floated about how to address the trajectory of Social Security and Medicare. Your organization has done that as well. But I just don't see any serious uptake of that from our Congress.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, though, that Congress is going to have to do something. In just 7 years, the trust funds that fund those programs will be totally out of reserves. So that means that new benefits and benefit payments will be limited to the revenues that are coming into the program. And that's about 75% of the promised payments. So seniors in 2032 will suddenly see their Social Security checks cut by a quarter if there's nothing done to prevent that from happening. So Congress is going to have to do something pretty quickly at that point. And honestly, they should have started to do it a long time ago, so we could have started phasing in those changes and making it more sustainable.
Chris, why do you think that's not getting more attention? Why is that not considered the 3-alarm fire that it really is? That 7 years isn't that long away, and especially when you think in terms of congressional classes, and you've got senators that are in office right now that are going to still be in office when we're talking about this, right, or right on the edge of it, and you've got members of the House as well that are likely to continue to run for another 3 cycles. That's not unusual, serving 2-year terms. This is going to be falling right on their plate, but they're not saying anything today.
Yeah, I think that's an unfortunate reality of our current situation. The longer that we don't talk about this, the harder the problem gets to fix in easier ways, right? We can start phasing in those changes now, but the total lack of political leadership on this issue, and this isn't a partisan issue, it's the same on the right and the left. No one wants to talk about these very steep funding cliffs that will present some really tough trade-offs in just a few years. I mean, you're exactly right. In 2026, what we'll see is the first class of senators that will absolutely be in office when this exhaustion happens, and they're going to have to do something about it. And we're trying to get people to start talking about this. We need our politicians to be telling us the truth about this issue.
Yeah, and of course, as you know, most of the time, there's not a lot of turnover, especially in the U.S. Senate, serving 6-year terms. So the vast majority of those that are sitting in the Senate right now are going to be in the Senate, I dare say, when this thing comes to a head, and they're going to have to take some sort of action. What are you guys recommending to address the coming insolvency of both the Social Security and Medicare's trust funds, which is kind of the reserves that we use to make up the deficit of revenue that we have relative to the payments, the expenses going out? We tap those trust funds to make ends meet. And Chris, if I'm not mistaken, with respect to Medicare, we're actually using general fund revenues to make up some of that shortfall as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so Medicare is a little bit more confusing because it has 2 different trust funds. One of them is for hospital payments. That's the one that will be exhausted in 2032. And then there's one that's fully funded by general revenues. So that one is running quite a bit of a deficit, but it doesn't matter as much because there is less of an accounting mechanism that will stop it from running that deficit. I mean, it certainly matters. It's contributing a lot to our federal borrowing, but it doesn't present the kind of tough trade-offs that both Social Security and Medicare hospital insurance exhaustion will present in 2032. We at the committee have just put out a bunch of ideas that we're calling novel solutions for the trust funds. It's our Trust Fund Solutions Initiative. There are ways that you can tackle it on both ends. Folks don't like to talk too much about revenues, but there are ways that we can increase revenue into the programs that doesn't necessarily increase people's taxes. So one idea we've come up with is called the employer compensation tax. And it says that 6.2% tax that employers pay into Social Security on behalf of the employee, that what if we covered all of the compensation that they're offering? So that includes like things like fringe benefits, stock options, everything. And that could raise a ton of revenue and really save the program from exhaustion. On the benefit side, last week we heard from the Social Security Administration that they announced the new cost of living adjustment. Well, maybe we can start means testing that cost of living adjustment a little bit and saying, the folks that are making the most well off, who some of which are collecting $100,000 in benefits, maybe they don't need a 3% increase in their benefits on an annual basis. Like maybe we could cut that into some sort of cap that they're still getting some increase, but maybe not getting the full increase that would be tied to their benefit. But that's just a couple of ideas. We'll be releasing a lot more solutions over the next year.
I've read the announcement, I guess, the proposal for the ECT, the employer compensation tax. So I can't recall, though, of course, covering all forms of compensation, such as stock grants and other expenses and other forms of pay that's part of the overall compensation package. But what about lifting the cap? That's the Democrats' favorite refrain is scrap the cap, making all just plain old wages and salaries subject to Social Security and let's talk about Social Security. Social Security taxes, both on the employer and the employee sides, what they want to do. Where does the committee stand on that?
Well, so we're in favor of any option that adds more revenue to the system or pares back benefits so that it's more sustainable. There are a few issues with just raising the cap. One is that our benefits are currently tied to how much we pay in taxes. So if we raise the cap to say one of the most popular proposals is to raise it up to $400,000 or above $400,000 of income. If we credit benefits along with that, it doesn't really improve the situation very much. And most of our history, we've seen that this program, the taxes are collected or connected to the benefit payments. So if we unconnect that, then maybe the program doesn't have as much support anymore, and it's really turning more into an anti-poverty program. Some people are in favor of that, some people are against that, but ultimately it doesn't solve too much. Another issue with raising that cap is that in some ways it's just stealing the revenue that we get for the rest of the federal budget away from that part of the federal budget, right? So it's taking general revenues away, because if we raise payroll taxes, well, then people are going to collect less in income. So it's kind of just an accounting trick to throw money different ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're up against a break right now, but if you can hang around with us, we'll continue this discussion. You good?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome. We got Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget on the line. We're coming right back.
Everybody wants you.
In the dark.
Okay, is everybody ready?
I'm ready. Ready here.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. We've got Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So, Chris, to further dig into this, does your organization, do you talk to, do you communicate directly with lawmakers in Congress and call their attention to all of these details, all of these facts, all of these realities, and then also make some of these proposals to them to see if you can get some sort of traction with the lawmakers to make some changes?
Yeah, we definitely do. I will say I've been at the organization for a little over 10 years now. When I first started, there was a lot more interest in talking about Social Security. I think the political winds changed a bit, especially I thought one of the most interesting things about the 2020 presidential election was that both major candidates did not really want to talk about how to fix Social Security.
Right.
They just wanted to talk about not touching it.
Right.
Right. So yeah, we do talk to a lot of staff on Capitol Hill when they're here. Obviously, the government's still shut down right now, so we're having a little bit of trouble doing that. But the staff are definitely really interested and engaged on it. We're just not getting as much traction as we hope. So we're going to continue to keep pushing for these kind of things because the reality is we just don't have that much time left to deal with it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the time is upon us, and it is compressing, and it's plowing ahead at a rapid rate of speed. 7 years will be here, and all the reports I've seen indicate that without action, it doesn't mean the whole thing's broke. It just means that the programs would only be able to satisfy like 3/4 of their obligations, something in that range, and that would be devastating to those who are. Honestly, don't even know this is going on. As you know, most of our Social Security recipients probably aren't aware that if there's no action, and they're still with us and receiving Social Security benefits, that without that action, their check's going to fall by about 25% from 1 month to the next when we literally run out of money, and the trust funding can't cover the shortfall between the amount we take in from wage earners and the amount we pay out to recipients. I don't think most people know.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right about that. I think that there's just been a lot of burying our heads in the sand on this. And frankly, it's not only just the politicians who refuse to talk about it. Some of the interest groups that, represent seniors, there's a really big one that I won't name, but a lot of people are familiar with it, like to say, Congress, don't touch Social Security, don't touch Medicare. We can't do anything about that. But what they're hoping and praying is that, when we do get to that exhaustion point, that we just, paper over it, probably with more borrowing, frankly. And that is just a totally unsustainable way of doing things. Our debt is already equal to the size of the economy. And in just a few years, we're going to surpass the record we saw after World War II. And it's just going to keep going up past that. But if we were to fix our Social Security and Medicare problems, we'd be fixing roughly half to a third to a half of the fiscal problems that we have, which is a lot of progress.
Yeah, no doubt. And to your point, since World War II, we're talking about the GDP ratio of our debt to GDP, not the total amount, obviously, of outstanding debt. But yeah, we were sunk with a lot of debt from the war. Honestly, and we were paying that back, and we were trying to get our economy rolling again to get our GDP up. So something else that I've researched, just got curious. There's always this narrative promoted from our friends on the right that say, "Hey, look, we're going to grow our way out of this $2 trillion deficit with these fiscal policies that will boost our GDP, and that, of course, means more money flowing into the Treasury, and that's how we're going to offset these deficits and trim them down and start hopefully reducing, not necessarily eliminating and paying the debt, but reducing the amount we add to the debt." So my research indicated, however, Chris, that the percentage of GDP that we collect in tax revenue has been remarkably constant throughout the decades, no matter what the tax rates are. It comes in at about 17% of GDP. So the folks on the left say, well, we just need to raise the tax rates like crazy. Well, you're still probably going to get 17% of GDP. It kind of harkens you back to the old Laffer curve of what's the optimum point at which our tax rate should be to produce enough revenue to hopefully to operate the government, but not so intrusive and onerous so as to negate GDP growth. I guess I'm saying all this to say I don't see how we're going to grow our way out of this.
Yeah, I mean, growing our way out of this is very much wishful thinking. Like, obviously, economic growth would be really great for our fiscal situation, and we should do everything we can to try to get as much economic growth as we can, right? But the reality is that we're not going to see the days of growing like we were in the 1990s of over 3% annually. We're looking at closer to 2%, maybe a little bit less than 2%, and a lot of that is just a function of our demographics. We just have a lot older people who are getting out of the workforce, and we're not replacing them at the rate that we were back after the baby boomer and everything. So the reality is that, yes, you can raise revenue a bit. The last time we had a balanced budget, revenues were about 20% of GDP. But remember, that also means that spending was about 20% of GDP as well. Spending is right now about 23% of GDP. So it's a very big difference. 1 or 2 percentage points of GDP is a very large amount. A lot of other countries collect a lot more revenue than we do, but they also have a lot slower economic growth. So there's trade-offs involved in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a point that I feel like is worth making, that I'm not sure we could do 4 or 5% GDP. I mean, if you look at what it would take in terms of GDP growth today to balance the budget, I just don't see that in the cards. Where's that going to come from? And as you probably well know, we're seeing, even though in the last quarter, we had 3.8% of remarkable annualized GDP growth. But when you take all the spending, the CapEx on IT infrastructure, because of this AI-driven data center boom, it's more like 0.1%, that all of our growth is coming from this one sector. And that's risky and dangerous and not going to be the long-term situation.
Yeah, that's totally right. I think that, we might be lucky to get a couple years every once in a while of 3% growth, depending on what's going on in the economy. But we're not going to get sustained 3% growth. We're certainly not going to get 4% or 5% growth. Yeah. We're much more likely to get, like I said, around 2%. And again, it's mostly about demographics. If we decided that we want suddenly something happened and we had another baby boom, maybe we could start talking about 3% again. But unless we decide we want more immigrants, which doesn't seem like that's going to be the case right now, or we have some massive productivity boom, maybe AI gets us a couple years of 3% growth, but it's probably not going to get us, decades of 3% growth.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And so is this something you guys pay attention to as well, which is the birth rate that a lot of folks are sounding the alarm on? Elon Musk, you've seen him, about a year or so ago, said, maybe the biggest challenge facing our society, global society, is humans becoming extinct. Literally, he said that our birth rate is not at a level that is replacing natural attrition. I think in this country it's about 1.6. We need like 2.1 to keep up, and there doesn't seem to be an end to that trend.
Yeah, it's true. In pretty much all advanced economies, what we see is that the birth rate tends to go down as the countries get richer. It's a perplexing problem. It's a good question of what the federal government can do to kind of, encourage higher birth rates. We did see in the tax bill that passed over the summer that there was an increase in the child tax credit. Hopefully, that will start increasing the desire to want to have more children. But yes, it's a quandary that we're going to be up against, and it's not easy to fix. There's just really not that many policy levers to pull to try to encourage people to have more children.
Well, one of the things that concerns me, and sometimes we may get criticized a little bit for it, but the people who can least afford a family are the ones that seem to be having the babies, and the people that can't afford it seem to understand I can't afford it, therefore they don't reproduce.
Yeah, I mean, it's perplexing, right? You would think that the people who had the most resources would want to have more children. And, especially as we're seeing people have, maybe because they're having children later in life, maybe some of that technology will help improve the birth rate. But yeah, it's a huge challenge. And it's actually one of the reasons why Social Security is in such dire straits.
Absolutely.
We used to have 16 people paying into the program for every beneficiary. Now it's about 2 people paying into the program for every 1 beneficiary. And unless we reverse that course, we're going to have to make changes to the program.
Yeah, we got to go, but I think when I researched those metrics, it was like 5 in the 60s, and now we're half of that. less than half of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Enjoyed the discussion, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We're stepping aside for a break. We got half an hour of middays remaining from the Element Wealth studio.
SuperTalk.fm. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Come on, let's get on with the show.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Don't you go believing what you see on the TV and in the magazines. Because you know what? This is the way old Dennis DeYoung would introduce that song. Because that's all bull. It's great. That, of course, ties into the title of the song, Fooling Yourself. It's a great tune. And the lyrics are quite real, I would say, and apply to real life there. Sticks! That's Sticks bumping us into that segment. Appreciate that, Rhino. The Azalea says, it's not really a difficult problem to figure out. It's just uncomfortable to confront when you worship liberalism. Yeah? That could apply to a lot of different subjects for sure and issues for sure. Timmy McGee says, Rhino, don't some people get federal aid for each child? I thought it used to be $2,500 a year for those who can't afford to, but keep having them. No, Tim, there's no like program like that, but what you may be referring to is the child tax credit, which is...
I mean, the amount of benefits you receive typically does go up the more children you have in the household. If they're
that's right, because all of our income eligibility tests are based on the number in the household. And it's not exactly dollar for dollar. So if you get, for example, I think in SNAP, it's $333 a month, as I recall, for an individual. But if there are two in the household, it goes to like $500 and change. So it's not exactly double. Assumption being you can economize when you're feeding two as opposed to one. And so it's not double what it is for one person. Are you looking at that? That's the schedule is published. I just had it up the other day, then it keeps scaling based on the number of people in the household. And again, it's not take the number of people and multiply it by what the benefits are for one person. It doesn't quite work that way, but it does increase with the number of people in the household. So the child tax credit, though, Tim. Yeah, and that was just increased for 2025 in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It is retroactive for 25, goes into effect, of course, in 2026, and that is refundable. The maximum amount, $2,200 per child under 17. The refundable portion is worth up to $1,700. What does that mean? Well, you file your tax return and you qualify for this $2,200 per child credit, and you don't have, and it's a credit against your tax liability, and you don't have enough of a tax liability to use all $2,200. The federal government says, okay, you did your tax return, and even though you don't have enough to get the full $2,200, doesn't matter, we're giving you $1,700. That's what's meant by refundable. A non-refundable credit means you got to have enough tax liability to take advantage of the full amount of the credit. So you do your tax return, and this doesn't take into consideration like you're a wage earner, how much you paid in through the year against your taxes. This is just when you get to the line that says this is your federal tax liability before you then enter the amount you paid in all year to then square up with the government. You either owe more or it owes you. This is just your federal liability. So you do your tax return, let's say in the case of the child tax credit, and your federal liability says, hey, guess what? You don't have a federal tax liability, which, by the way, is about 49% of the households in this country. Because once you take the standard deduction and you reduce your gross income by that amount, and that's been increased substantially, you may not have enough income left over to even owe any taxes, right? So you got a zero tax liability. You want to take advantage of this $2,200 child credit. You don't have $2,200 of tax liability. You can't do it. The government says, okay, but we'll give you $1,700. It's really welfare. You have to be honest about it. It's redistribution welfare. It's that you've done your tax return, you don't make enough to owe taxes, period. And the government says, have $1,700. And so that's what Chris was talking about. Maybe that could be considered an incentive to get people to have children because they do get a credit off their taxes. You can't get that unless you got a child in your household whose age is less than 17. So that has been increased somewhat. So your earned income, by the way, has got to be greater than $2,500 a year to qualify. I mean, you've got to have some sort of wages, salary, more than $2,500 a year. That's not a whole lot of money to qualify. So that's the child tax credit. The change that was made is that the old credit was $2,000. It's $2,200, and the old refundable portion, I believe, was $1,200, and it got increased to $1,700. That in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that just changed. So hopefully that answered your question there, Tim. I appreciate the question. Is a good one. Let's see. What happened in Washington County? Yeah, we were just talking about that, right? Rhino, something happened, some sort of drug bust in...
Yeah, there was a sting by federal authorities, and there are some reports on it. I believe the latest I saw was that there's going to be a press conference at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oxford at 4 p.m. with all the details. So we might have to wait till then before we start naming names, because there are a bunch of law enforcement officers, sheriffs, and sheriff's deputies that are caught up in this.
Interesting. Okay. On the C Spire text line, Dave in Monticello says a balanced budget is a fallacy. We have not passed a budget in over 15 years. I agree with you, Dave. I don't see us ever balancing the budget. I don't see us ever paying a dime down on the debt. So what are the consequences? A lot of people say, well, what's the end game, and how does this story end? In my view, it doesn't. And what really are the consequences is inflation. When the government spends $2 trillion or more than it makes, that means it's got to go out and sell Treasury securities, debt, essentially, incur debt to make ends meet. And then the Fed can print money, expand the money supply to pay government obligations, and all that's inflationary. And so the risk is inflation. So how do we mitigate the inflation? Productivity. The only way for us to keep spending $2 trillion more than we take in and avoid hyperinflation is to produce more. And that's why we need more people, honestly. We need more people to produce and consume. That's why it's concerning that our birth rate is falling below the rate necessary to replace those who leave the planet, that die, pass away, natural attrition. So if you look at the death rate versus the birth rate, it is concerning because we're not reproducing enough to replace those who perish in this country, in the world. It's a huge problem, as you know, in Asia, where not so long ago, you were restricted. In fact, Rhino, if I'm not mistaken, if a mother had, maybe a household had already hit the government's allowed maximum number of children in the household, and the mother got pregnant, did they not automatically abort the child? I think that was like government policy, if I'm not mistaken. Now it's just the opposite. They're begging people to reproduce. Japan, whom the president just met with, newly elected prime minister, leans more to the right, kind of a shock to the world, really, when she was elected. Huge problem of an aging population that you just heard Chris Towner from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget discuss. Huge problem in Japan. So they went from incentivizing and penalizing for having too many, multiplying too much, to just the opposite. Please go out and have some babies so that we can offset our elderly population. Not only that, they live longer. So that means typically they have a more expensive retirement years. They consume more resources without being able to work to put into the system. I mean, that's just natural. You get older, you can't work at the level you do. Maybe work at all. Maybe you're fully retired. And also, you're more prone to being sick. And that costs money to take care of people. So think about this. When Medicare was passed, the life expectancy in this country was 66. Okay, if you happen to live to be 65, you get on Medicare, on average, you're living another year. Well, now it's 79. Final segment coming up.
Hey, this is Bob.
We interrupt this program.
Gerard Gibert.
Here we go.
This is huge.
Huge news.
Huge news. Huge.
You need to listen to this.
Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Okay. So by the way, I was talking about the fertility rate and also known as the birth rate. And I said that we're not reproducing enough to offset those who are perishing, dying, leaving. And by the way, to be a little less callous, that's known as the replacement rate. So I apologize for that. I just went straight to the chase there, right? The replacement rate, to maintain our population level. It's the way what are these people called that do this kind of studying? There's a demographist. That's not what they do, right? There is seems like some sort of science involved in studying the birth rate and population trends and all that sort of stuff.
Demographers.
They are demographers. Okay. I had it right the first time. So interesting. On the C Spire text line, in response to our two-segment discussion with Chris Towner from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, that's a great segment. Appreciate that. This is on the 228. I don't know what the solution will be since our politicians do want to avoid this ultimately unavoidable issue, but I do think it does begin with just getting out the facts like you guys are doing. Thank you for that, Van in Ocean Springs. Appreciate that, Van, and I agree with you, and I don't shy away from delivering this message, even when I'm out doing public speaking. And I know it's not popular. I know nobody wants to hear it. And honestly, Rhino, most of the time, the reaction and the response I get, especially on Social Security, which, I've talked about a million times, which is, well, the Congress stole all the money. And that's just not true. It's categorically false, 100% false. Something that Chris didn't mention from the responsible federal budget that I am a proponent of is allowing Social Security to invest in assets other than what it is restricted to today, which are these very low-yielding treasury instruments known as special issue bonds. If the Social Security Administration and the Social Security Fund was allowed to invest in traditional stocks and bonds and other securities, rather than having a 3.5% rate of return on the investments of those monies, which, by the way, right now sits at about $2.5 trillion of S bonds, we would be investing in stocks and bonds and other securities and realizing a significantly higher rate of return, which would address this issue. By the way, I did learn yesterday that our Mississippi Public Employees Retirement System, a little bit of good news, no surprise, the rate of return this year is coming in at about 12% because the Public Employees Retirement System, consistent with all the other state-level retirement systems, is allowed to invest in securities. In fact, it cannot buy S-bonds. Only Social Security can do that. But if you look at our holdings, our portfolio in the Public Employees Retirement System, it is traditional stocks and bonds managed by a professional wealth manager, and they've generated an average return of about 9% over the last 10 years. That's fairly consistent with the S&P. But this year, because the market's had a banner year to this point, it's about 12%. Now, you would expect that, especially given that, even though it's not a pretty picture on this day, but for the year, last I checked, the number one holding that PERS has in terms of a particular equity issue was Microsoft, which I submit as a pretty dang good holding, and it's had an unbelievable year, a run-up, I believe, of double digits. It's selling off today because of some information we shared with you earlier. They're still on track to make about $110 billion this year on sales of about $250 billion. That's an unbelievable amount of net profit. But right now, today, the algorithms are saying, you guys reported you're spending way more money than we thought on hard assets, physical infrastructure, IT infrastructure to execute your artificial intelligence strategy. Oh, boy, we don't like that, so we're going to sell off. But mark my word, for the end of the year, it'll probably be right back up, another $40, $50 a share. I think $100 a share this time next year. I'm not a professional wealth advisor. That's just Gerard's opinion. Just want to get that out there. By the way, if you want a professional wealth advisor, I recommend Element Wealth, the fine sponsor of this program. They do a fantastic job. Certainly have done one in my personal case. I can personally attest to that. Mose says, Gerard, I saw a clip yesterday of a young woman that made a lot of sense. She said, take away welfare, food stamps, and Medicaid, and maybe women would be more careful about who they sleep with. I hear you, Mose. I got to tell you, though, I don't think a 17-year-old that is engaging in the act that produces a baby is thinking about Medicaid. I just don't. And the fact is, Mose, we could say we could take all that away. They're still going to do it. And our society's not going to say, sorry, you got to have that baby in the street. And by the way, once it's born, you're on your own. We're just not going to do that. I think education and promoting a message that discourages promiscuity and all the other things that lead to these bad outcomes that we're seeing. And remember, I've shared this on the program, 57% of the babies born in this state are covered by Medicaid. That means they're born to an impoverished household, and the deck's already stacked against them right off the bat, the get-go. We're out of here today. Back with you again tomorrow. Stay safe, and God bless everyone.
SuperTalk Mississippi Media Production.